Mike. It's good to see you.
Hi. Thank you for the wonderful and very warm introduction. And it is great to see you. And Avichai did make a little shidduch for us, but I remember with our group getting a tour of which museum were we?
It was
You
the
gave
Temple
us
Museum.
unbelievable. That was the highlight of our trip. You're an incredible docent and art critic, obviously, and I think I don't know if anybody is planning on traveling or anybody's going to be over there. Are you still giving tours right now or no?
I am, but I'm going to turn the tables on you. So thank you. But we're
No, it was so
you.
good. I'm
Yeah.
not. Yeah, I'm
But
chocolate.
it was lovely, and it's been lovely knowing you since. You've been interviewed a lot, so hopefully we can take this in some new directions that are also special for our CSP audience. And I want to
Yes.
start with, can you describe what you ate today?
Yes. Yes. What I ate today. So this morning had 3 cups of coffee with almond milk. I had half of a banana, and then I was at Kfar, and it was our 5-year anniversary at our cafe and bakery. And so our pastry chef, Katrina, makes this amazing, we call it a challah Danish. It's basically challah dough that's laminated with butter and then usually stuffed with, usually marzipan, but she did almost like ice cream or birthday cake frosting kind of, so with sprinkles. So I took a bite of that just to taste it, and then I ate the whole thing. And then I came to Zahav, and we have a CPG hummus at Whole Foods called Zahav. It's like it's our recipe hummus, and so every time there's a new batch being made, we get airdropped a few of them. So I had to taste that, and then I ate a couple peaches as well. And now I'm drinking an iced coffee.
Lovely, thank you. So basically, it sounds like you eat in your restaurants. Do you go by the chef doesn't cook at home, or do you cook at home?
I love cooking at home, and during COVID, I got in a habit of that. At the time, the house that I had lived in, I'd lived there for 2 years. I'd probably cooked 4 meals total, and then during COVID, I really just loved it. I really enjoyed it, and I just felt. I know this is really cliched, but it's a little bit hard to have a ceremony or tradition of eating at home when you work nights, right? I cook for other people, and everyone's like, "What do you do for Shabbat?" And I'm like, "Usually I'm making lafet at Zahav on Friday night or Saturdays." So I got really accustomed to that, and so on usually Sunday nights, Monday nights, and Tuesday nights, I try to be at home to cook dinner for my family, and I would say at least 2, if not 3 nights of a week, I'm cooking meals.
Amazing. Yeah, that's a big shift from what I know from before. So you started your day at a bakery, and maybe I'll take us all the way back there. And I was kind of looking at your journey and wondering if we can maybe kind of navigate between your personal, your Jewish, and your Israeli, like those 3 identities.
Yeah, of course.
So maybe we'll start with the personal and kind of culinary identity. Can you say a little bit about how you started? And I'll insert, do you still bake?
Yeah, great. So how did I start? I started as a dishwasher when I was in high school. And then my father, actually right before that, before we made Aliyah and moved back to Israel, my father owned a Subway sandwich place. So I made sandwiches and was a terrible employee, terrible. And then, moved back to Israel, moved back to the States, dropped out of college, moved back to Israel, and got a job working at a bakery in Kfar Saba, which is probably what you're referring to, by accident, not because I wanted to be like a chef or a baker, but because I was like a 3 semesters art, major with pretty bad Hebrew, somehow worse than my Hebrew is now. And we had lived in Kfar Saba, and my parents had divorced the year before, so it was my mother, my brother, myself, and a Russian wolfhound named Fred living in a little apartment in Kfar. And so I would just walk up and down Rehov Weitzman, seeing if people need, because I like needed to work. I like didn't, have a job. And so I got a job working at this bakery, Mafiat Kfar. And I really fell in love with, to talk about the three, my personal, my Jewish, and my Israeli, it was like, it almost checked every box right there.
Do you want to say?
Personally, I was so used to just taking from people. Like I was just a brat. I was, I was like, just like privileged kind of American kid that, didn't really work hard and didn't really have any direction. And the bakery was the opposite of that, meaning that it was tremendously hard work. It was camaraderie. Every kind of person in a bakery in Israel. I mean, everybody. It's like there's so many different kinds of Israeli society, or so many different cultures, so many different languages, and it was really, really hard work, and it was with your hands, and I just like loved it, and I got paid very little. Every kind of person in Israel eats baked goods like 3 times a day, and especially on Yom Shishi, everybody was buying chalot, and it was like I was, I was like a part of family's household. Like I felt like I was part of something. It was so generous, right? I know this sounds cliched, making bread, braiding challah, and then scrubbing sheet trays for 14 hours, which is mostly what I did. But then just being part of custom or tradition or family was like so different than that's what hospitality is. It's generosity, right? It's giving with really no expectation of some sort of return. And I felt like up until then, I'd been living my life so differently. I went to this really expensive university and pissed it away. And my parents, who did not have a lot of money, worked tremendously hard. And I just tanked at university. And then I was like making like 9 shekels an hour, working 14-hour shifts and like loving it and just loved giving. And then, I guess as part of like Israel and Judaism, like my grandmother was from Bulgaria, from Varna, and I grew up with her being really the best cook I'd ever known. I was a very picky eater, which I know is hilarious at this point. Growing up, her borekasim and her pastel were and are still the best things I've ever eaten in my life, right? And they were the thing that also made me really different, right? She would come and visit every other year. We didn't have a ton of money. We didn't go to Israel very often growing up, but whenever she would come in and visit us in Pittsburgh, in Squirrel Hill, Pittsburgh, she would make borekas like the whole time. They'd be in the freezer. There'd be like dough or batzek like all over the place, and that was her love language. My Hebrew sucked. Her English was terrible, and this was her love language, right? And then also, her maiden name was Toledo, and so like the act of making borekas or making chalot in this bakery was to me the first actualization of a spirituality that was important to me in my life. I grew up in a conservative Judaism in the States, mostly because there wasn't enough Hebrew and Reform for my mom. My father's like a pork-eating atheist, Bulgarian Sephardic Jew, and my mom never wanted to leave Israel. And so, like conservative world, which I loved growing up in, or at least appreciate now growing up in, is a little bit confusing. And I didn't really fit in with religious Jews, which there are a lot of in Squirrel Hill. And Reform to us at the time felt a little bit like church, even though now I belong to a Reform shul here in Philly and I love it. And so my relationship, my visceral or my spiritual relationship to Judaism and to God or to whatever was really abstract and ever changing. I mean, it kind of is now too, but I guess I guess my relationship is a little bit stronger, I suppose, to all of those things. So when you eat a pastry or a borekas that's made with this puff pastry, but it's not really puff pastry. It dates back to Inquisition and then post, that made its way through Ottoman occupied Balkans, right? And then got stuffed with like feta cheese or whatever, which Bulgarians will argue that it's Bulgarian cheese, and then made it to Israel. To me, I mean, that's almost as religious as it gets. That's the extent for me. So I just felt like to be able to make halot for multiple families, to feel like I was part of something, and to not feel like I was taking, was probably the reason why I cook, and maybe why I cook Israeli food, maybe why I feel like a very strong, proud Jew, even though I eat treif, and in an interfaith marriage and work on Fridays and Saturdays.
And then your shift into Israeli cuisine is actually also deeply tied to both your personal story and Israel. Can you say a little about that?
Right. So my shift to Israeli cuisine, I mean, I grew up thinking that I would be, or not, I grew up after I started cooking, I thought that that I would cook like Italian or French food. You know, at that time, most of the peers, if they wanted to be like fancy chefs, most of my peers would go to Spain, like San Sebastian. There's like 5 restaurants that everybody kind of worked at, or they would go to France, or they would sometimes go to Italy, and then they would move to New York, and then they would open a restaurant and then get a Michelin star and then die. And that was kind of the goal. I was working in an Italian restaurant here in Philly named Vetri, owned by one of my closest friends, Mark Vetri. And I and my little brother David was in Golani serving in the military, and he was killed in action about 5 days before his release on Yom Kippur in 2003. He was killed by Hezbollah snipers. It was on October 6th, which was on Yom Kippur, and it was a few days before his release. And I don't know. I mean, there's a long sort of story on how it came together, but basically, I think that would be the catalyst for why I started cooking Israeli food. I just felt like going back to Israel. Well, I mean, the truth is, before his release, you know, you get like a month break or whatever, and it coincided with the month break that Vetri was closed for. And so I'd flown back to Israel. My mom had bought plane tickets for me under the agreement that I would cook dinner for her friends, which I thought was like 6 people around the kitchen table. It turned out she invited like 25 people, so it was like 2 nights of, you know, these multi-course meals, and I needed to like shop for all the stuff. And David was on break, and we hadn't really gotten to hang out in years. And you know, we were obviously living like very different lives in a different continent, and so we really bonded for 3 weeks. We were in the car driving around, going to the beach, shopping, cooking. He was like the front of the house, I was the back of the house, in my mom's tiny kitchen in Kol Saba, and it was really, really meaningful. It was also the first time that I'd seen Israel through the lens of a chef, and it was like just fascinating. Culturally, anthropologically, spiritually, it was like fascinating, and it was also really the last time that David and I were together, and we also got to sort of actualize. I mean, you know, we were no longer so much older brother, younger brother. I think we were just like we were just best friends. So it was a very, very meaningful time. And then a month later, I got the call and that he'd been killed. And then I went back for his shiva, and he was killed in an apple orchard in Metula. And the owner of the property and the farmer, Moshe Fine, who has since passed away, came to the shiva with a bushel of pink lady apples. And I just remember tasting them and, you know, wondering how they could be so delicious, you know. And so I don't know, a lot of those things sort of came back, and I got a job working under my now business partner, Steve. And we were cooking, like I was cooking kind of like European food, but with like Israeli stuff, right? Like monkfish braised with hawaj, or my grandmother's borekas recipe, but the dough, but stuffed with foie gras and truffles or whatever. And eventually we just, you know, I came actually I flew back, and my dad picked me up, and we went to Busi in Shkonat Tikva,
Oh,
and had dinner. And I was like, this is the best way to eat. Why is nobody doing this in the States? And again, anthropologically, spiritually, like it just was great, but also it was just a great way to eat. And so that was really the catalyst for opening Zahav, which I would say is much, the restaurant, like one of our restaurants, Laser Wolf, is much closer to that experience anyways. It's a Shipudia, so it's like more casual. But at the time in 2008, I don't think that people really understood. I don't think people would have gotten it. So that was the reason that we opened Zahav.
So let's kind of, if you had to define now what Israeli food is, like how do you define it? And that will probably lead us into other questions too, but how would you define Israeli food?
How do I define Israeli food? I mean, I don't know. How do you define? So what is it? It is, multi. It's dozens of different diaspora Jewish cuisines intersecting with indigenous cuisines to Israel. So Palestinian cuisines, which is also varied depending on where you are. Galilean cuisine, for example, or even Northern cuisine, like Levantine cuisine is very different than the food that's eaten in Gaza, which is like kind of North African, but actually not very unique. The way that Egypt happens to be in North Africa, but actually the cuisine is quite different. So it would be that plus Druze influence as well, but really like Greater Syrian Levantine cuisine pre-World War One. And I mean that sort of geographically and also culturally, intersecting with all the Jewish diasporic cuisines that, generally speaking, and I know we're going to argue about this, especially when it comes to Tunisia, most of those host countries don't really have Jews, right, anymore, or not the way that they did as well. I don't think there's probably any Jews in Yemen anymore. If they are, they probably don't tell any of their neighbors, which means that like most of the Yemeni Jewish cuisine, which is unique, right? Because it's not just Yemeni food. It's got laws of kashrut, it's got Shabbat, it's got holidays, all these things, these parameters that help, almost sort of liberate and free a lot of these different cuisines. They don't exist anymore in those host countries, right? So it's become Israel has become a repository for all of these different cuisines. A lot of them date back really far. I mean, I got into an argument once with another academic that was talking, his point was that, eggplant carpaccio, which all the Israeli chefs were fighting over who made it first, was really just like stolen Palestinian cuisine. And I was like, dude, okay, Jews have been cooking eggplant, in Iran or in Iraq for like before Islam even existed. Okay. So like you can't, and even Sephardic, I mean, back in the day, if you were a Jew in the Inquisition and you cooked eggplant or cilantro, those were the two, and olive oil, right? Not lard. Those were like three indicators that you were definitely Jewish. And the reason we know that is because all the Inquisition trials were so heavily documented. Most of the tells for Jews was dietary. So I just, I mean, I'm probably delving into another question or answer that you're going to ask me as well. But so you have dozens, if not 100, Jewish diasporic cuisines that have intersected with indigenous cuisines, such as Palestinian, mostly Palestinian, and Druze, with the intersection of the Spice Road and the Silk Road, ancient and modern winemaking, ancient and modern agriculture. Mesopotamia is where agriculture as we know it kind of started. And then you also have like the startup nation-y agriculture as well. And then the Mediterranean, Red Sea, you have snow-capped mountains in the north and then desert in the south. So you have all those things, you shake it up, all the conflict, all the commonality, spill it out, and that is it. What's crazy? I can see the names of everybody leaving. And I'm like, what did I say, Claudia, that just offended you right now? Why are you leaving us?
Just ignore that.
Claudia, come back. come back.
Focus on all the people that are here.
Okay.
I have two
Okay.
questions that kind of stem out of what you just said, because and I'll mention that in Israel for many, many years, and it still kind of is like this, we have here like Misada Yehudit, Jewish restaurants, where we could find like Ashkenazi, hardcore Ashkenazi chicken soup, gefilte fish stuff, and they're called Jewish restaurants. And then we have Mizrahi restaurants, so Oriental restaurants, which have the variety of food. And now when you described Israeli cuisine, basically, even though everything here includes also like the Ashkenazi, most of what we see in Israeli food that is also coming across outside of Israel is actually the non-Ashkenazi food, even though it does have part of the mix. So can you maybe say what you think about that? How and why is that happening? And does your cooking actually take some influence also from those cuisines, or are they put aside?
I do. Well, I think it's interesting, especially if you want to go into like the societal clashes that happen in Israel, which we don't really have to get into. But as you know, as everyone here knows, even though there's like plenty of like discrimination happening in Israel right now, depending on who you ask, the sort of degrees, Ashkenazi culture was not really appreciated at all at the start of the nation, and also isn't really used in terms of marketing unless it's things that are like sort of high tech or whatever. But in general, the Ashkenazi character, meaning the Jewish tradition, I mean like the tradition practice like in Judaism, and then also from a cultural level, including food, was kind of like pushed aside, right? And I'm not sure why. I have ideas of why that is, but like growing up, I think in Israel, my father growing up in Israel, obviously, sort of 48 on, I don't think that like Ashkenazi culture was totally appreciated in general. I think that Israel needed to like create a new strong Jew that was neither, was maybe a little Mizrahi, a little Ashkenazi, but I don't think that sort of cultural identification, especially from Ashkenazim, was totally appreciated. And I also think that the representation of Ashkenazi food was really difficult. We have that issue here in North America. Most people think of Jewish food here in the States is like either deli or like shitty chicken or like something that is like flavorless, right? Or like dough, like blintzes or whatever. That is like absolutely not the case. Most Jews moved to North America, I mean, especially Montreal too, which has like Romanian Jews a ton, and then later Sephardic Jews. They came with absolutely nothing, right? And they had to live in cities, right? So all the foraging, all the mushrooms, all the berries, all the goose. I mean, if you go to Budapest and you ask somebody in Budapest, first of all, they know what a Jewish restaurant is. And if you know the history of Hungary and Jews, it's a little bit weird. But if you're like, hey, we're going to like Mille Fouet, and they're like, oh, that's the Jewish place down the street. You go there, and goose and foie gras and all these things are used like the way that like in Southern food here in the States, pork is used, right? It's like crazy. You don't even know. I mean, schmaltz, if you talk to a lot of people over there, they don't even consider chicken schmaltz or chicken fat as like real schmaltz. It's goose fat, right? So I don't think that immigrants that came here or that came to Israel had the same means or frankly the same interest because they were escaping pogrom or Holocaust or whatever. Food wasn't top of mind and they just didn't have access to those things. So Ashkenazi food is amazing. It is delicious. Representation essentially everywhere, I think, has been really, really crappy. And I think that in Israel, for many different reasons that we can go into or not, Ashkenazi culture is not something that's like super celebrated. It doesn't have the same mystery as Mizrahi. It doesn't have the same, the spice level, even though that's not totally true. There's things like fantastic paprika that are essentially part of peppers or peppercorns or things are used often, but they just don't get the same wow factor as we're used to right now. Admittingly, I don't cook a ton of Ashkenazi food, even though it does exist on our menus here at Zahav. Even if you go to Tel Aviv right now in Shuk Carmel, there's some M25, which is a great kind of like grill restaurant, and Yonatan Borovitz, the chef who's amazing, will do like smoked beef tongue, with pina, with maybe horseradish, with skug, and it's like kind of a mishmash. I just don't think that the representation has been there, but I believe that there's a window for it. I think it should come in.
Okay, so another question that kind of stems from, I mean, you get very enthusiastic when you talk about the history of food, and I'm wondering when in your journey it turned from like I'm cooking to also I'm acquiring this knowledge and kind of becoming so enthusiastic about it.
I mean, I think that probably started. I think that the catalyst was probably at the bakery, because I realized that like the pastries that I grew up with from my grandmother meant so much more. Right? They told the story of Sephardic Jews leaving Toledo, and Ottoman occupation, and I mean all these things that are really important to our history, and they represent me. And then I also, to get back to the religious part, it's like I continue that cycle with my kids, and I'm part of this door to door theme, right? An idea which is very, very Jewish, in my opinion. So those things mattered. I would say that especially after David was killed, I needed a way to celebrate his life. I needed a way to help market the country, or at least explain the country to people that know nothing about it, that continue to find Israel to be misunderstood. That's the thing also, is that I'm always like, I know a lot about Israeli history and maybe Jewish history. I know a lot about Israeli cuisine. When I go to Israel, oftentimes, and this will probably happen with us, where it's like, oh my God, have you been to this one place? And I'm like, oh my God, this is a new place. And you're like, no, it's been here for 100 years. Let's go. And so I go to Israel all the time. I eat in Israel all the time. We have 20 something restaurants here in the United States. Most of them are Israeli. I know all the chefs. I know all the cuisines. Every single time I go, I eat somewhere that I've never heard about that is like the best X. It's been there forever. It's like 3 generations, 4 generations. And usually it's got some story tied into the diaspora. And that's what I love about Israeli cuisine. I love the stories. I love the oral history. I love the discussion of migration and the transmission and the transformation of foods as its sort of path through history.
So what I'm going to do before we jump into more heavy stuff, I'm going to shoot at you some questions, some quick questions, and you'll just answer them and we move on, just so before we dive into the heavy stuff. So what are your 3 cooking essentials? What will you always use to cook?
I will always use olive oil. I will always use lemon juice. I will always use parsley.
Okay. What would you never eat?
I eat everything. I have a weird phobia of mayonnaise.
Of mayonnaise? Interesting.
Yeah, I don't love mayonnaise. Yeah.
What are your top 3 places in Israel, which you know right now?
I mean, they're always changing. If I land tomorrow, I go to oh God damn it, this is such a hard thing. I go to Botarga in Carmel Market. I really love that restaurant. I would go to the Turkish Borekas in Shkonat Tikva,
I know
Dilek. Yeah, you go to Dilek.
Yes, Dilek. Yes.
The wire, the Batek
introduced you to Dilek.
You did not introduce me to Dilek.
No? Okay.
I love that place. I love it. But it's amazing, really, really good, and very different than the Borekas that we eat normally. And I would go to, wait, what did I say? Dilek. I would probably go to Erez Komorowski's shawarma place, to Guy Peleg, who used to be at Mifkash Rambam, is now making shawarma at Erez's place, and that's where I would go right now.
Cool.
But how did I do? Okay.
I'm happy with all your choices.
All right. All right. Good.
They're all
That's
tasty.
as good as it gets. That's as
It's
good as it
also a
gets with
very
Israelis.
difficult question. I'm very happy I'm the one asking and not the one having to answer that because I would stumble
Yeah.
over my words. What's your favorite spice?
My favorite raw spice, my favorite spice that is not blended would be smoked cinnamon.
Would be what?
Smoked cinnamon.
Smoked cinnamon. What do you
Yeah.
use for?
I put it in rice with like tomatoes. It's amazing. Or stew like beans or whatever. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, one last quick question before we go into the heavy stuff. The Bear, the TV show, is it how do you feel about it as a portrayal of your work? Is it a good one? Is it a terrible one?
I would say that it's probably the closest to the real thing. The issue is, and I like love horror movies, right? And usually at night I'll like drink tea and watch horror movies to like unwind from work. I've watched like 7 minutes of The Bear and I'm like, I can't do this right now. It's just too much for me. But I think it's very, very close. I am always a little bit curious as to why. I mean, people are so food obsessed, right? And so restaurant obsessed. And things in restaurants that we deal with are in the States, especially, but also in Israel, immigration, things like gender inequality, addiction, depression, mental health. All of those things, I think that if there was a series that focused on a restaurant that could zoom out a little bit, like the series The Wire, and really tackle those things, I think it would be fascinating. And I don't know why that has not been done yet.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Sounds like something an Israeli producer and director would come up with, right?
Who knows? We'll see. What fires up your creativity?
I am the most creative when I am not at work. So working out at a boxing gym, surfing, going to listen to, live music or something is usually when I get the most creative ideas for food.
Lovely. Okay, so now from the quick ones, we'll go back to some quick ones, but let's dive a little bit into food and politics, which in the last year you found yourself in quite some storms. So can you say a little bit about how you view this? For those who don't know, maybe can you say a little bit about your place or the role you took upon yourself in the last year? Not that it was completely out before, but and the way you view this.
There's a couple different sort of answers to this. The role that I took the last year, or the way that like conflict, or the way that anti-Zionism and sometimes anti-Semitism come in, is to say that anything Israeli is basically stolen, right? So cultural appropriation, and I'm only speaking about the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians that is sort of turned into a wider discussion, right? And especially here in the US, when everybody is trying to like behave as anti-racist as possible, they've kind of dropped Israel into this sort of acid test here in the US, especially in the liberal bubble, which I'm a part of here in Philadelphia, right? So if you think that Israel does not have the right to exist, it is very easy to say that Israel has stolen land, it has oppressed Palestinians, and it has stolen food and appropriated it for its own benefit without acknowledging Palestinian influence, right? Which is problematic when you're a chef that is promoting Israel, because things like hummus and falafel and shawarma, which have also not been created by Palestinians, but are more associated publicly with them, as they're cooked all the time in the Levant and also by Palestinians, even though Coptic Christians from Egypt invented falafel in the 4th century for Lent. Shawarma, it's probably Ottoman, but might not have been. And then hummus was also probably created in Egypt. But if you ask a Lebanese person now where hummus comes from, they definitely say it's from Lebanon as well. My issue is that all good, everybody can like argue it's all kind of Greater Syrian or Egyptian. When we go to the actual roots of these things, nobody gives a shit about it until I make it, and then I've stolen it. And so to me, that's the theme. Now there's also Palestinians that are like not true. We could go on and on about like the treatment of Palestinians by Israelis or by non-Israelis, and it sucks. And so when you have things that people have associated with their culture, when they don't have a nation that is like widely accepted by the world, or when they're like in checkpoints, or when they're like, dying in Gaza by the hand of either Israelis or Hamas or whoever, they get really pissed off when they see somebody like me making hummus that they've grown up with an Israeli flag next to it, right? Now, I don't put an Israeli flag all over my restaurants. My employees don't wear Israeli flag pins. I don't ask them to do that here at Zahav. Up until recently, because we had to expand the wine program title to Eastern Mediterranean, we said wines of Israel and Palestine. I don't non-acknowledge Palestinian influence upon things before, but I also realize that, and this is what people have a hard time with, is that the culmination of all of these different cultures and cuisines make up Israeli cuisine. I'm not arguing that shakshuka comes from Tunisia, even though if you ask the Libyan, they would have a problem with that. That would be appropriation to them, or Moroccan for that matter. I'm not arguing that that falafel might have been introduced by Palestinians to Israelis, but I actually don't know if I don't know if I totally agree with that too. But I think that would actually be closer to Egyptian, but it doesn't really make a difference. Israelis market it really well, and we could probably say or state with confidence that the reason that falafel is popularized in North America is probably a lot because of Israelis. Same thing with hummus, right? So I acknowledge all of those things. What I will not do is say that Israel and her culture and her cuisine is entirely made up of stolen things, because I think that is bullshit, and I think that is a double standard that we have, because we're talking about food, right? If somebody makes like chicken schnitzel in a pita with trina and chamutzim and zeytim, we're talking about 5 different cultures, and actually the pita being kubez, right, which is like maybe Palestinian, but some would actually argue that the oven, not the taboon, was actually a later invention anyways, and introduced by Europeans in the Middle East. Okay, so we can sit and like fight about all this stuff, which is just food. Food travels, culture travels, all these things, ideas travel and transport. The implication that I have somehow stolen them is a way to say that, oh, sorry, the battery's getting a little bit low here. Are we still here? Is a way to say that Israel doesn't have the right to exist, in my opinion. That's what everybody's trying to say.
So beyond the food itself, you have used in the last year your platform to fundraise for
right.
Israel and stuff like that, which isn't a trivial thing to do when you're in any case in this arena, which is very difficult. So still putting yourself out there and deciding to very clearly support Israel and use your platform, if you can say a few words about that. Mike,
yeah, of course, yeah.
Mike,
I'm still, can you still, yeah,
we can hear you, but we can't see you.
I know. You know why? Because my phone is about to die, and I'm texting one of my people to bring a charger. So, so fundraising, yes, we fundraised on October, I believe it was October 11th or 12th, we did a really big fundraiser where 100% of the revenues of all of our restaurants, we donated to United Chatala for aid. And as it turned out, I mean, Chatala was also doing medical services for the IDF, which a few of our employees found out about and thought that we were supporting the IDF basically, or that we weren't being honest with them when we told them this was just for, civil society or whatever. And that turned into this big balagan. Our argument, which I don't need to argue because raising money for an ambulance service in time of war, I don't need to justify. And when you have 360,000 reserve soldiers that are getting called in after, we could go into details about what happened on October 7th. We all are aware of this. I'm not going to hide or apologize for raising money for an ambulance service in Israel, who has also, by the way, helped train Palestinian Red Crescent. And also during, we have a ton of Turkish employees here at Zahav. During all the earthquakes, Hatzalah also went to Turkey to help out, right? So it became this big balagan, and of course all the anti-Zionist groups in the States and especially in Philly picked up on this. And there was a big protest in front of Goldie, one of our falafel shops, but I don't actually think it was related to the Hatzalah thing. I think it was just that happened kind of independently, and that was used as justification. So we had all these protesters outside of one of our restaurants chanting that Goldie was committing genocide. And then the White House, Governor Josh Shapiro, everybody was very vocal about saying that it was anti-Semitic and BS.
Just one kind of comment and question to wrap up this side before we shift again into quick questions, and then we'll also have time for questions from the people, which I'll mention, by the way. If you want questions to be asked, put them in the chat, direct them to me, I'll ask them soon. So with all this thing and being, I think, also now very clearly unapologetic about where you stand, you keep your family out of the spotlight, which I find admirable because you could use them in a way.
Yes. Yes.
I wondered if you can and talk a little bit about that, that you really keep them away from the spotlight.
Well, I think that there's like a couple things. One, I would suppose that my relationship to social media, especially, and listen, we've done an Israeli restaurant since 2008. This is not a new thing, what we're experiencing, right? This is something that comes up time and time again. Certainly during conflict, it does. I would say, especially now in the US, I would say it's the most sort of intense. But I just felt like I stopped with my kids. I just felt like it was like yucky. I didn't like posting pictures about my kids because I started to get, not as it relates to my kids. I just got really weird, sometimes really hostile sort of messages. And I was like, well, it doesn't take very much to figure out where I live, or, I mean, frankly, if anybody wanted to like, they could just come to Zahav like 4 or 5 nights a week, and I'm like always here. So, but I just felt like including my family wasn't appropriate. It's a weird world out there with algorithmic stuff, with violence, with hostility, with bots, with I just didn't want to include my family in that. And I also feel like there's complexities to these things that I don't want to try to have to explain on social media. As I said, I'm in an interfaith marriage. My wife is American. Her family's from Pakistan. She's Muslim. I don't need to like hashtag this or turn this into some sort of object for people to latch on to whenever it serves a purpose for them. It's my family, it's my life. I can, I don't need to include my family into those things. And I think that I frankly find it like, I liked social media early on when I didn't have a ton of followers. I mean, I use social media as a marketing tool. It's great for the restaurants. It's great for the brand, all those things, obviously, right? It is emotionally and mentally harmful, I think, to kids. And it is also the reason that I loved it so much early on was because I could post about my kids. And now I don't think I need people knowing about what my kids are like or who they are. I don't need my kids under scrutiny. I don't need myself or my wife or anybody under that. And I don't need to explain the goddamn thing about them to 105,000 people. I will say it's very funny too, like the algorithm, like during the war, I've gained 0 followers in 9 months. Wow. And you can look at the sort of thing, but I was like, wow, it's because I'm not posting the most hostile things on either direction. Nobody is interested in this. And so that's the thing. When you're up against an algorithm like that, I just don't find it I don't think that there's a need to like bring into my family. So I've tried to every now and then I'm like, this is the cutest goddamn thing I've ever seen. I will put it on stories. It will go away mostly, or it's in the cloud forever. I don't really know, but I try to keep my family private.
Thank you. So before turning to questions from other people, I'm going to ask a few more medium, small questions. So, yeah, you're getting a charger?
I'm getting a charger right now.
Yay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for
Hey,
whoever.
it's Madeline. Yay, you did it. Thank you so much.
Hi, Madeline.
Yeah.
So while you're charging, when did you get your first tattoo?
I got my first tattoo when I was 17 years old in Vermont, and it's a tribal tattoo. And what about you?
I have one. I feel it's always either one or like endless. So I'm trying to hold on to the just one so that I don't end up. I see you went for many.
I went for many. Yeah, I got one, and it's tribal elephant. And then after I got clean and sober, I needed something to obsess over, and then I got 100. Yeah.
Okay. So we're not going to dive into the story of addiction and rehab and all of that. People can find that in other interviews, which I'll link in, but I didn't know the tattoos had anything to do with it. So
yeah,
interesting. What do you like about writing cookbooks? There's a new one coming out. We're going to have the pre-order sale in the fall.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. What I like about writing cookbooks, I don't actually like writing them. I like reading my business partner's Steve, like what he writes about it. I think I like contributing anecdotally, and I like making food. But the cookbook process is really, we've produced 4 cookbooks, and after every single one, I'm like, I'm not doing this again. It's just a lot. You know, publishing world is weird right now. Speaking of politics, I would. We have a book coming out in September called Zahav Home. So there's no indication.
And there's going to be a pre-order sale for that.
There's going to be a pre-order sale, and then there's now we're planning our cookbook tour, and it is like fascinating to see how challenging or like the difference between the first and this one when it comes to publicity.
Amazing. What is the secret for a perfect boreka like your grandmother made for you?
Secret is love. Secret of love. I think that's like most of it. I think you make food for people that you love, and it generally tastes very good.
Top 3 places in New York to eat?
Top 3 places in New York to eat. Red Hook Tavern right now for the burger. It's in Brooklyn in Red Hook. I would say, God, that is a tough one. I mean, there's so many good restaurants. Why are you doing this to me right now? Can I come back to it?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
But I have a not necessarily a much easier question. What is one thing you want people to know about you that maybe they don't know?
I don't think there's any, I think it's all kind of out there. I mean, there's things that people don't know about me that I think are funny, that I'm very good at origami. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
That's it. We didn't grow up with a ton of resources. And so my bar mitzvah, I was tasked with doing all of the origami centerpieces. So we would drive to my aunt's in Orlando for like summer vacation from Pittsburgh, which is like a 17-hour drive in the back of a Dodge Caravan. And I folded origami cranes and flowers like irises for 35 hours. And those were the centerpieces for my origami party, or my bar mitzvah party.
Okay. How do you invent a new recipe? Like, what's the process? Is there a process? When does it come to you? How does that happen?
So there's not an exact formula, but I think it's generally like what is in season right now. What is in season right now? What is like the air temperature, the atmosphere? Are the leaves changing? Where either in the diaspora or in Israel am I excited about? And like, what's the technique? So I know that's not exact, but I told you I usually come up with the best ideas when I'm not at work.
Who would you like to feed? Like if you could say, I want this person to step into my kitchen and to cook them a meal, who would that be?
Well, I mean, we've been talking for a while and you haven't been to my restaurant, Cheryl, so I think it would be you.
Okay, I'll make sure to come by. If people come to Zahav and they're the ones that need to choose from the menu, what would you recommend for them to choose? We have Neil Eisenberg is in Philly, so if he steps into your restaurant tomorrow and needs to choose from the menu, what should he choose?
Well, if Neil has never eaten here before, I would say the lamb shoulder that we brine and we smoke and we confit it and then glaze it with pomegranate. Yeah, our pomegranate lamb is what you should get. Neil, that's what you should get.
Is there a soundtrack that you kind of have playing when you're cooking, or how do you choose the music for your restaurants?
Well, if anybody here is on Spotify, you can search Zahav Belly, like Zahav Belly, all lowercase one word, and that's a good one. That's
Okay,
I created that. I put that together.
We're gonna send that in the follow-up email. What is your best vegan recipe? I'm picking. I'll just say I'm picking up questions from the chat. So
yeah,
if
good.
anyone wants to ask questions, to just put them in the chat. I'm taking a look and asking from there. So what's your
So
best?
we do vegan recipe. I mean, we cook a lot of vegan food here just kind of by accident. I would say right now, we make this zalouk, which is Moroccan, and then we enrich it with amba, which is Iraqi, and then we barbecue whole eggplants and then shellac the zalouk with the amba on top of the eggplant, and then kind of roast it again, and then hit it with trina and a ton of cilantro. That right now is very good.
Amazing. Are your restaurants kosher?
Our restaurants are kosher style, meaning that that we don't serve. We're about to open a place called Jaffa Bar, which will be an oyster bar, so that's kind of the exception. But Zahav, Laser Wolf, Kfar, we don't mix milk and meat ever together. Like they're always on separate plates, and we don't serve treif at all. No pork, no shellfish, none of that. Goldie, the falafel shop, is actually has a hechsher, so it's vegan and it has kosher certification.
So Rabbi Eli Spitz and Linda Spitz already have reservations for Zahav. I think that kind of covers their questions about the kosher. So thanks for that one. What else? I'm just checking if I missed any questions in the chat, other than many compliments for your food that are coming here. If people know someone who's aspiring to be a chef, what would be your best advice?
My best advice would be to get that person to go work in a restaurant in a kitchen for at least a year before they decide like culinary school or any of that stuff. I would say at least a year.
And in your role now, having these many restaurants, I know part of it has to do with the partnership that you have. Like, would you recommend that? Like how, because it's a long relationship you have with Steve, right? That like is
yes, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think partnerships, in my experience, Steve's one of my closest friends. Steve is my closest friend. He is my best friend. He is a brother, and I couldn't imagine. I mean, there would be no restaurants without Steve, and he feels the same way about me, I think, unless you've had a separate conversation with him. I don't really know, but no, it's a tough business, and things in our career are really complicated, and managing hundreds of people not easy, and Israeli restaurants also not easy. I mean, there's a lot easier ways to make not a lot of money. So I would definitely recommend it, and it's also lonely at the top, I would say.
There are a few more questions here about when is your hummus coming to Denver, perhaps open a restaurant in Orange County. But I like this question that I think will bring us to a close. Are there any Israeli chefs that you are inspired by?
Yeah, there's a ton of Israeli chefs. So first of all, Denver should be by September. We should be in every Whole Foods by September. We're as far west as Chicago. Orange County is a wonderful place. California, I mean, if we could transport Zahav and just drop it in Southern California, I think it would be great. It's very far away from Philadelphia and labor laws. My wife's an employment lawyer, and she's like, "You were never to open a restaurant in California." And then, but I visit there all the time, and I have family in like San Diego area. I love it. But I look at real estate in as a joke, but really in Encinitas like twice a day. And any chefs that I'm inspired by, I mean, Erez Komarovsky is a hero. I think he's just incredible. I think he, you know, his sort of modesty and his expertise is just incredible. I don't know, there's tons. I don't know. I mean, Ori Chef is amazing baker, one a really wonderful guy. Osama Dalal, who might not be cooking anymore, but he is from Akko. He's as good as it gets. I really love him. I think he's really, really good. I mean, Ottolenghi really started or helped start kind of a movement. And I would say his partner, Sami Tamimi, is an incredible Palestinian chef. I don't know. I guess that's it.
No, that's a nice list. Last question as we close our program. So you've accomplished a lot. Is there a dream, something kind of you're looking and say, oh, that's what I want to do when I grow up?
I think it's always changing. I think that we always have these short-term goals and long-term goals that generally don't get met, for better or for worse. Or they get exceeded, you know? So I don't know. What is it? Man plans, God laughs, you know? But I don't think there's any my life is beyond my wildest dreams. So
well, that's a beautiful note of gratitude to end our program with. I will say to all the questions in the chat of what the hummus is called, when is it coming your way, where are the cookbooks, what are the names of the restaurants, a follow-up email will be on its way with all the information so that you can go on a mouth-watering journey and hopefully also go and fulfill some of those craves. Mike, thank you so much for joining us. It was wonderful. Hopefully you'll find a way around United Airlines stop flying, and I'll see you here very, very soon. I have here questions about when CSP is doing a food tour of Israel and all of that. We'll figure all of that and more out, and we'll send information in the follow-up email. So
we do actually, Bavakasha Tada. So good to speak to you. I really enjoyed this, and I hope to see you all in Philadelphia or in Brooklyn. And I mean, Adina and I are planning a food tour in March with Abichai as well. So God willing, we'll be over there safe and sound. You take care. You be safe. I cannot wait to see you here at Zahav in February. Okay.
Looking forward to it. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.